Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so stoked there's people looking fresh. I hope we're keeping hydrated. Saturday at Splendour. Thank you so much for joining us today. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the original and traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on today, the Arakwal Bundjalung people and the wider Bundjalung Nation. We all here respectfully acknowledge the wider First Nations communities of the Northern Rivers as well, past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded from us to you. We thank you for this platform to meet and share today. My name is Sose Fuamoli. Some of you may have seen me on a panel yesterday, and if you did, thank you so much for sticking it out with me. I was very nervous. Today we're going to be much more lively, fun. We want to get you guys involved as well. So thank you so much for joining us at this hypothetical, quite aptly titled, Is it environmentally responsible to be human? So if you've rocked up just freshly awake, we're going to be tackling a little thing called the environment and climate change. So yeah, this one's going to be a good one. We have a huge panel today, so I'm going to get cracking. Today, this panel of specially selected individuals, who you'll be meeting very soon, will be navigating a hypothetical scenario put together by Doctors Emma Rush and Catherine Strong from Charles Sturt University and RMIT, respectively. We currently live in a society and time where the state of the world is rapidly changing around us, and the effects of climate change, specifically human-driven climate change, simply cannot be ignored. I think there's a lot of conversation about, what are we going to do about climate change when it happens? It's for a lot of people, it's a very far-off scenario that we don't need to worry about. When in actual fact, it's a very immediate thing that is happening, particularly to a lot of our neighbours. For me specifically, I come from Samoan heritage. So if you think about it, our island has a population of just under 200,000 people. We're about a 4-hour flight from here. And we're one of the nations that is feeling the threats of climate change possibly more immediately from the rising sea levels, multiple natural disasters that are forcing people to relocate. It's killing the tourism industry. These smaller nations that are so close to us, they're feeling it. And so it is such a privilege for me to be up here and to share in the discussion and to invite you to share in the discussion as well, because we might think that, we've still got a few years left before we need to worry, but it's a very constant thing that we all need to be aware of and think about in terms of the near future as opposed to a long-term plan. Today, though, we'll be working through a hypothetical moral dilemma, which is going to be very interesting, which will hopefully make us think about how to handle future challenges moving forward. So I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. He is a presenter. You may have seen him in the science tent here, wandering around all-round legend, Adam Spencer. Everybody, bring him up.
Oh, thank you very much, Sose. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Thanks for coming along to our first discussion today here in the forum. My name is Adam Spencer. I will be your moderator today. Can I make something clear from the top of the show? My job here is to advance the discussion, to moderate, but also to entertain and maybe provoke a little bit. So if in the course of the next hour and a half I say something, put forward an opinion that you find a little bit woo-hoo in your face or challenging, don't be offended. I'm just putting things out there to try and provoke, promote discussion, get you thinking about things maybe from a different angle to what you have before. Our panel have also been encouraged to say things that really make us think. Let's agree as a group here that the words that come out of our panel today are not necessarily absolute signed in blood oath, the opinions that they will hold to the grave or the organisations they sometimes represent, etc. They're here to make us all think as we navigate the road of, is it environmentally responsible to be human? Let's be honest. Human beings have done some incredible stuff, Sose.
Yep.
Einstein's general theory of relativity, the poetry of Sylvia Plath, the recent season finale of Married at First Sight. Unbelievable moments in high points and culture, but at the same time, thank you very much for getting the joke, feel free to laugh, living as humans comes as a cost. It comes at a cost to other living creatures and the greater ecosystem in which we all bubble along. So today, our panel of humans, as Sose said, is going to examine the question, is it environmentally responsible to be human? I want you to smash the happy sticks together as I welcome them to the stage. First up, a dual professor at Princeton and the University of Melbourne. In Splendour parlance, this man is the childish Gambino of ethical philosophy. Professor Peter Singer, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah! Woo! Joining Peter on the stage, one of Australia's leading artistic filmmaking couples, currently touring their new Enviro Doco 2040. If you will, they are Australia's Brangelina, or perhaps the Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones of responsible documentary making. Damon Gameau and Zoe Tuckwell-Smith. Yeah! You've seen her before on Splendour stages as vocalist and keyboard player for the indie darlings Cloud Control, but she's also the driver behind the Feet Solar Farm initiative that we'll hear about soon. Heidi Lenffer. And let's keep the rock coming with an Aussie guitar legend from the Drones and his band at Tropical Fuckstorm, whose international tour starts this afternoon here at Splendour. Welcome Gareth Liddiard to the stage. Yeah! Our next panellist, Greens Senator for Tasmania, and in my opinion, owner of comfortably the coolest hyphenated name in world politics since Boutros Ghali, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson. Yeah. Woo. Musician, composer, climate justice activist, filmmaker, proud Yorta woman, Allara Briggs Pattison joins us. Allara! Star of indie breakfast radio, television, print, and director of the Melbourne Literary Festival, the one and only Marieke, Heidi. They just keep coming. Next up, a qualified environmental scientist, read nerd, who's pioneered work on environmental health and safety standards at Australian outdoor music festivals. He's the general manager of this whole space, the North Byron Parklands, Matt Morris. And a businesswoman executive activist who a year and a half ago smashed through the green ceiling and was named the first ever female president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, the wonderful Mara Bun. Yay! Come and join us. There you go. Fantastic. So it's come and have a seat over here. Let's get going. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. Time for our hypothetical situation panel. I should point out, some of you've seen on TV hypotheticals where people are actually assigned characters and roles. I won't be making you role play. I'm just asking for your observations if you were party to conversations and events like this, starring our hero today, Leaf. Leaf is 20 years old, racially mixed, non-gender specific, studies communications, eats vegan, grows their own herbal teas, loves skateboarding and music. Raised in a loving ALP voting family with a conservative religious attitude, weren't we all, to social issues, Leaf's relationship with their family is important, but they frequently find it a challenging relationship. Leaf is devastated by species extinction and has recently begun attending a community support group of people who feel the same way. Now, Leaf's just walked into an extended family dinner because it's Leaf's parents' 25th wedding anniversary, so it's a big shindig. Leaf's older cousin Mick, who's in a long-term relationship with a Wiradjuri woman, Kath, pounces on Leaf immediately. Leaf, I'm so glad you finally got here, mate. I really need to talk to you. It seems like it's going to be a while before the food arrives. Going to have a quick chat. I need advice from someone who I can trust. Kath, she wants to start a family. She wants to start it soon. She's got her heart set on 3 kids at least. Leaf, I just don't know if we should be having any kids the way the planet is headed at the moment. It's really stressing me out. Leaf, I respect your thoughts on these issues. Give me some advice, mate. What should I do? Anyone on the panel who'd like to kick us off on that discussion? Gareth, I see you giggling. Is that your way of scratching your neck saying, I have firmly held opinions on this subject? Take it away, Gareth Liddiard. What should Leaf say to Mick about the rightness or otherwise of having children with our planet in such a fragile state?
Do whatever you want, but I don't know. I go the David Attenborough line, don't have kids, there's too many of them. I think it seems like most of our problems, or the planet's problems, are caused by too many people. Not people themselves, but just too many of them. I don't know. That's what I would say.
Over to you, panel. I saw you nod, Marieke. I'll get your thoughts and then...
Fuck me. Well, I agree with with Gaz. I mean, I don't have kids and I'm choosing not to, but people can do whatever they want. I think people are pretty widely educated in the too many people problem. So I would encourage, what's the cousin's name again? Mick. To do some research of his own and come to a decision that feels comfortable to him.
You sound like you're dodging the question there, Marieke. Can you
No.
truly be informed about world population and still make your own decision?
Yes, why not?
Still, it's a little easy to say everybody should just do what they want, isn't it? I mean, we are supposed to be giving advice. You're being asked for advice in this situation. I think it is sitting on the fence, really. And I'm going to put a counter to Gary's and ask people to think, so suppose that everybody who cares about the future of the planet and its future environment says, I'm not going to have any children. But the rest of them out there, of course, are still having children. Is the long-term future of the planet better in that situation than it is in the situation where people who care about the future of the planet continue to have children? At least, let's say 2 children, maybe 3 might be excessive, though I confess that I have 3 children, I'm sorry. It's too late, my wife's over there, you can blame her.
Whoa, the professor of ethics throws his wife under the bus very early in the conversation.
Anyway, 2, 3, whatever.
Can I ask you, Zoe, do you have any thoughts on kids?
It's too late, the waters have broken. It's coming whether you like it or not. I think, with my very slow-moving baby brain, that it depends on what Mitch or Mick's wife? Mick, what's Mick like as a friend? Because we've heard a lot about Leaf, but what kind of guy is Mick? And what kind of lady is his wife? And are they ready for children? Is this a stable relationship? Are their children going to be reared in should they be having kids, quite frankly? Are they ready for it? With the responsibility that comes from it and the awakening that comes with it. And I actually feel like, for me, life deepened significantly when I gave birth for the first time, and I felt more connected to that experience than anything I'd ever experienced previously. So,
what about if you said to Mick, like, what is actually our role as human beings? Is our role as humans to be consumers and to extract more things from the planet? If we look at other animals in the kingdom, the ants, for example, have a mass 8 times greater than humans, that they don't leave a mess. They use their resources really cleverly. If we can get to that point, I think we can survive with more people on the planet. We aren't using farmland properly. We're using it to grow food for animals. We're trashing things we shouldn't be. There is a world where potentially we could live with more people. We just did things fundamentally different to what we're doing now. Mick.
Hi, Heidi, you're a pop star. Pop singer Miley Cyrus and her Aussie movie star beau Liam Hemsworth recently announced they'll be not having babies anytime soon. In a new interview with Elle magazine, I'm sure you all caught this, Miley said, the environmentally conscious star explained, they're not interested in reproducing until, quote, there are fish in the water. Until I feel like my kid would live on an earth with fish in the water, I'm not bringing another person in to deal with that. We don't want to reproduce because we know the earth can't handle it, end of quote. Heidi, as a fellow pop icon, are you on the same page as Miley Cyrus on this one?
Yeah, real strong parallels between us. Thank you, Adam. I'm glad
it was a long bow, I'm happy to admit.
Yeah. Glad it's been acknowledged publicly. Look, I was thinking about Mick, and I think the character or the thought process that Miley is representing there, I think, is a really strong and well thought through one, and that's really pleasing to see. Mick, his character is still under question. We've all not figured out whether he and his wife are whether this is a facetious question or whether it's a well thought through, earnest one. But couples do have to decide exactly what kind of role as parents they're going to be and whether that's going to contribute or detract from the worsening crisis. Because, like Peter was saying, we do need... it's almost like if you are seriously questioning whether it's worth bringing children into this society, that almost qualifies you as someone who should probably give birth. Because you're thinking in the way that our species needs to be if we're going to continue.
Well, because Peter Singer studies show that intelligent couples, on average, en masse, tend to have more intelligent kids. So isn't it beholden on professors like yourself just to be belting out as many as you possibly can to raise the IQ of the deeper end of the gene pool?
Well, there's a lot of other things that we can do to help to improve policies and get people to think a little bit more. And maybe setting an example of having huge families isn't the best way to do that. So I think there are other things that you can do. And we should be doing them, though. We should be doing more of them. I think that's certainly true.
Can I raise the issue about fish in the sea? I heard that quote, and I spent a lot of my time in the Australian Parliament around fisheries management, looking at healthy oceans. And my feeling on this issue is there's so much we can actually do. So I'm kind of leaning more towards what Damon said. You know, I think it's a cop-out to just be lumping it all on population when there's so much we can actually do to change the way we live. And I'd really like to see someone like Miley Cyrus or others actually get involved in helping us make oceans more sustainable, because we need advocates out there pushing these things so vested interests don't always get their way. Look, fisheries management's pretty rooted in this country and all around the world, and the ocean is broken, but there's so much we can actually do. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there if we just had the guts to do it.
All you have to do is look his way, and suddenly you have to say something. So, you know, as a practicing Buddhist, there's a really interesting way in which the Buddhist tradition looks at existence in 6 different realms, and they go from the hells to the heavens, and you can interpret them in different ways, like your emotional states over the course of the day, or if you do the full throttle. It's really about how your karma evolves. And so Buddhists pray to be reborn in the human realm, because we humans, we have agency, we have intention, and we can direct our activities towards different outcomes. Really hard for my dog to do that, who I love very much. So we have a real responsibility given that agency, and we're not aware of it, but there's something really powerful about being human if we kind of wake up to that power.
But a recent UN report said that the world population will hit about 9.7 billion by 2050, could top out as high as 11 billion by 2100. We accept, as well as humans operate, we couldn't fit 100 billion on the planet. There is a number that is too many. Is 11 billion too many, or is that a number at which we could still sustainably, effectively work? Do we get to a point where, as a civilization, as a world, we would have to make tough numerical decisions?
I think it depends how we're going to live. Project Drawdown did a study on this and said that there is 400 million unused or degraded acres of land around the world that are ripe for reforestation, planting food crops and whatnot. We're wasting our resource in a shocking way. We're using about 90 billion metric tonnes of resources every year, and the Earth can replenish 50 billion, so we're almost double. So I think there is a world where we could have 11 people if we fundamentally change the system. We can't keep living as we are. I think we all know that. But I think we're not happy the way we're living we are. It's not proving to be fruitful anyway. So what an opportunity to change. And ironically, one of the best solutions to this, again from the UN, is to say if we educate and empower girls throughout the world, if we give them access to reproductive health services, job opportunities, that UN population comes down by 1.1 billion by 2050, just from empowering women and girls, which we should do anyway, but the bonus is climate change, resources.
I'm sure it was a slip of the tongue, but you did say you could imagine a world with 11 people. That's total Illuminati stuff. I love it, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. There's 12 of us on this stage. So you're all gone.
Sorry guys, you're gone.
You're gone. One of us misses out. There's another one on the way. I presume that's one of them. So 2 of us are very complicated. Allara, I see you just sitting back here, hearing the discussion roll on. Do you have any observations you want to make?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to pay respects to the traditional owners of the country we're on. Pay my respects to the Bundjalung Nations and the surrounding areas, and respects to the country, their elders, their past, their present, and all Indigenous people in the room, and my own ancestors, the Yorta mob, and just clarify that I only ever speak from my own experience as a young Indigenous woman, and that opinion and that my experience is not what every other Indigenous person is going to say or think. But coming from the oldest living culture in the world, I think it's pretty clear we didn't have like how many billion people. And I've heard stories from my grandfather and different elders saying that if things were bad, if it was a bad season, there wasn't enough water, there wasn't enough rain, or there was too much rain, we had business to make sure that we didn't overproduce extra babies when it was the bad time. So I'm not sure, because I also think that it's really important that as wise and knowledgeable people that we're passing down the smart information to the next generations, but that doesn't necessarily have to be our own children. And also that the amount of knowledge held by Indigenous people around this country, my own mob, and around the globe, I think that that we really have some answers to these questions, and that there's a very big perspective change that I think needs to come through a lot of the environment organisations and opinions of non-Indigenous people.
In a couple of seconds, I'm going to see if anyone in the audience has a comment or question they want to make. So do be ready to throw your hand in the air quickly if that is the case. And I'll get you to race around with that little cube. Now, I'm going to get two more quick comments before going to the audience. Matt, I saw you nodding when Allara was saying. What was she saying that resonated with you? Then a quick question for Peter Singer, and we'll go to the audience.
Well, I think what Allara said that I thought was very important is that there seems to be a disconnect with the carrying capacity of the land and of the resources. And in Australia, we live in a bubble. We are in the top probably 1% in terms of wealth, and I think we don't have a war-torn environment. We have a reasonably healthy environment, and maybe the perspectives of need and those sorts of drivers is not as acute for us as for other countries and other cultures. Traditionally, cultures that haven't been as technologically advanced rely on extended families, and that is where in these sorts of countries we have exceedingly large numbers of population. I still don't think Miley Cyrus should have another child or a child.
Okay. Quick question from you, Peter, because it's an interesting, when it comes to population and family and kinship and generations, and there will be different ethnic groups, different cultural groups, different religious groups might have inherently different feelings about. Some religious groups say it is wrong to curtail whatever the natural population is. Some groups say we have to preserve our heritage that's numerically dying out. Can humanity come to one common position on this, or is it reasonable for some people to hold out against what others might consider to be the greatest good if they're driven to it by deeply held spiritual or cultural reasons? Nice, simple yes-no question for you there.
So a lot of these spiritual, religious, cultural beliefs have been formed in a completely different era, when there was no overpopulation, when nobody knew anything about climate change, about the greenhouse gases changing the climate of the planet. And for that matter, when there also wasn't really effective contraception. So some religions have adapted to this different situation. They have thoughtful people who are thinking out about how to modify and what the relevance of this new situation is to their beliefs, and they're prepared to be responsive to that context. And certainly, we need to advocate working with people like that, but if there are people who are simply going to say, these are beliefs that were written down in some book 2,000 years ago, and therefore we can't do this, and obviously at the time that book was written, nobody had any idea of these issues, then I think we need to push back against that. I don't think we can simply say, well, that's your belief, so that's fine for you to do. I think we have to say, you are in a different world, and maybe we can't persuade you, maybe we can't force you, but we can certainly do our best to reduce the influence that you have on others.
I'll get these two quick comments down here I see with the hands. If you're holding the orange microphone, hold the black circle up towards your mouth and talk fairly confidently. So
how's that, Adam?
Well, hello. What would you like to say or ask? Fairly short, thanks, mate, because I'm already staggeringly behind time. I love it.
I'll keep it brief. Just wondering what the panel thinks of the Extinction Rebellion model of peaceful mass civil disobedience as a proven way and possibly the only way to bring about the change that the science demands.
Okay, and I'll get one answer on that, and if the person could explain what the Extinction Rebellion model is at the beginning of their answer, that would probably help a lot of the audience, certainly me. Fire right, Peter, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I do. So it's a mass civil disobedience movement against the possibility of extinction not only of other species but our own. And I took part in the mass resistance to the Vietnam War. I'm old enough to have done that. And I've often wondered, climate change is so much greater a peril. The Vietnam War was terrible, but it was local. It wasn't going to wipe out people across the whole planet. And I've often wondered, where is this sort of upsurge of disobedience and protest against climate change that will match or surpass that against the Vietnam War? And maybe this is the beginning of it. And as long as it's non-violent, I certainly think it's a good thing. It should happen.
I'll get a very quick comment from Allara, then I'll take the second question. Did you want to say something on this topic, Allara?
Yeah, we're too focused on the solutions and not looking at the root causes being capitalism, colonisation, and greed.
I'm getting to that, don't you worry. We'll be having a good swing at that very soon. What would you like to ask, ma'am?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So something I'm noticing a lot in this debate is that there's a lot of us and them kind of language. So it's sort of talking about the people who care, the educated people, they should be spreading their genes, and then there's the rest, and the rest keep having babies. There's a bit of creating a divide.
Great.
And I guess that's just a comment maybe to be discussed.
Can I put that to you, Damon? Because if you haven't seen Damon and Zoe's film 2040 yet, a big part of the message of that is that if it becomes us versus them, nothing will get done. And we have to take everyone, even people you might quite deeply disagree with on some fundamental questions, on this journey.
Yeah, I think
Keep going, Yorta. You just turn that down.
I think the election was a great wake-up call for that, because what didn't happen is we didn't tell the story properly, and that story is that these solutions do exist, but they also strengthen communities, they create jobs, all the things we value as human beings. And I think sometimes if we make it too scientific, if we talk about language like anthropogenic, negative emissions, people can't connect to that, and so it becomes highfalutin and they don't feel part of it. So I think the only way we're going to get out of this and transition is by treating each other as human beings and welcoming people, meeting people where they're at, that they value their jobs and they value protecting their kids, and usher them through that and make sure they feel no one gets left behind.
I'm going to get an incredibly short response from Peter and Mara on this, because this is the space they live and work in. Then we're going to move the discussion on.
Quickly on the Extinction Rebellion, it's happening because of political failures. And we saw the Occupy movement. It swelled, disappeared. It's the Extinction Rebellion, climate strike, for school strike. It's got to have a political strategy. My party, the Greens, set up 40 years ago because people felt that they needed to get people in Parliament to represent them, so they had a political strategy. So I'm all for it. It's bloody good. It's one of the only things that's getting me out of bed at the morning, is seeing young people standing up saying this is bullshit, we're going to take matters into our hand, but we absolutely need a political strategy to go hand in glove with that, or sadly it'll just go the way of some of these other movements.
Mara, your quick thoughts on either of those two issues raised?
So connecting the dots between the two, every successful change movement has 5, 6 different elements, and they include the civil disobedience base. You have to have a mass movement. You also have to have a policy dimension. You also have to engage with investment, with business. You also have to have a very diverse mob out there and respect each other. The minute you start infighting, the unions do that a lot, you lose that power, right? So when you think about same-sex marriage, the woman's vote, when you think about all these things that we have done as humans, we have done them because we've hit them on all those levels. And I think Extinction Rebellion escalates the kind of crisp sense of what's at stake. But unless we line up all those other elements, it's going to remain as something that we watch on television.
Okay, back to the party where Leif was just about to answer the question. We were all hanging on Leif's response, but before he could, Mara, his cousin, steps in and says to Mick, "Whoa, what are you doing asking Leif's opinion on anything environmental? For all his credentials, Leif, you flew to Europe last year to do your study exchange. And I saw your post. You're about to head off to that music festival in Byron Bay next month. 40,000 people descending on Parklands and tearing it to pieces." Mick, who wants to defend Leif, said, "Yeah, well, listen to you, Mara. When you went to the beach last summer, you took the longest showers I've ever seen anyone take. And you drove 2 blocks to the beach instead of walking. As good as we all try to be, we all have our failings when it comes to leading a perfectly sustainable life. Now is the time, people, to fess up to the people here. You all care. We all care. What's one of your two deep down, yeah, look, I could be a little bit better when it comes to that? Who wants to be the first one to fess up and admit their own environmental...
I fly way too much.
Yep. What can you do anything about that? I mean, it's part of you spreading your message.
Yes, and we are lucky enough that we've been able to work with an organisation that offsets my flights, but I still don't think that's enough. I think we have to be drawing down carbon. It's not enough just to offset what we do, but it is something that gives me grief. I've cancelled quite a few flights lately and done Zoom talks or Skyped in for a presentation, and that works just as well, but I do fly more than I would like to.
Heidi, tell us about feet, because that came out of your concerns about your business and your passion.
Precisely. Yeah, well, we actually took the time to figure out what a national tour of cloud control would actually create emissions-wise, and it's 28 tonnes of carbon, which is equivalent to an annual household emissions footprint. So a whole year that we rack up in 5 weekends of shows. Ooh. And of course, you'd know we don't just play one tour a year. So bands can be on the road for years at a time. And so we have, I mean, that's a question that we need to figure out. I'm just pointing at the two of us. No one else is calling. It's just...
Well, tell us about feet, and what does feet aim to do?
Yeah, so we've figured out that if we're going to, obviously touring is a very important cultural contributor, and we don't want bands to stop doing that because of the beauty that music brings to the world, but we need to figure out a better way to do this given what's at stake. So feet...
Holograms.
Hologram touring is on the cards. Next tropical fuck storm.
So Feet's a giant solar farm, is this right? And how does it work?
So every time a band goes on tour, we have now the option through Feet to put aside a small percentage or as much as you want of the profits from that tour to be invested directly into solar farms being built around Australia. So our intention is to actually accelerate the solutions that we know we need. The whole world needs to globally transition to renewables ASAP. And so if every band, when they go on tour, could be actively accelerating that, that's a solution that we can get behind.
Matt?
And could I just say, Heidi, it's artists like yourself and other artists that actually can play a really important role in promoting greenhouse footprint reduction in energy consumption and the like. You guys can be ambassadors. When you actually look at the whole carbon footprint of something like a festival, the biggest carbon footprint is that of travel for people coming to and from the event. So getting people to think about those sorts of things in their own personal life and coming from artists and even from festivals, brands that people recognise actually can start to affect that behavioural change that has some old.
Let me ask you a little bit more about Splendour, because I know I came to the original Splendours. You know, we're talking almost 20 years ago. They were very different beasts in a lot of ways. But the genuine environmental awareness now, come on, try and reuse these cups, let's minimise this, bring your own water bottles, little things like that, is so much more impacted on everyone here now than it was. You highlight travel. Where else does this place, as hard as it tries, where are the real pain points on environmental impact? And what do you guys do really well that you're proud of and would claim is world class?
Well, I think first from the warts, the problems is solid waste, and we have the pleasure of 19,600 and something campers, just over my shoulder there. Many of them haven't camped before. Many of them go to Bunnings and buy a $39 pop-up tent and a $12 roll-out mattress, and if it rains and it gets muddy, decide to leave it with us afterwards. And the solid waste stream that gets generated from that sort of, I guess, lack of understanding. Back in your and my day, Adam, we'd take our parents' very good quality canvas tent, and if we didn't bring it back, we weren't allowed back in the house. Yep. But I think that sort of sustainability message in terms of products and also the redundancy that's built into products and the cheapness of these products that are generated for such a low cost make it incredibly difficult to change that behaviour. But also, even in the case where we can find service providers that can utilise those resources and sew old tents into tote bags or the like, because of the quality of the material, it's very hard to find homes for it. What do we do well? We do really, really well in terms of environmental management from a fauna and flora perspective. This particular property here has had somewhere around 280 days of ecological assessment done on it, greater than probably any development on the East Coast. So we know exactly what's going on in terms of the flora and fauna. And then as you'll note, if you've not already been out to the campground, you have the opportunity to plant your own trees out in the campground, and so the Splendour in itself has planted tens of thousands of trees on this site.
Gareth, you're a vegan. Big tick. You're about to fly to the United States with tropical fuckstorm. Big question mark. Personally, do you think you're doing all right? What could you do better? What are the challenges for someone like yourself living an environmentally sustainable life?
I mean, yeah, we fly all the time, and it's a dirty job, but I don't know. I just try and, my version of offsetting it would just be, I don't get behind factory farming and everything they pour into that. So, I mean, but otherwise, I don't know what else to do. I'm not walking anywhere, you know what I mean? I'm not swimming to the US. Yeah. So,
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people used to walk. Yeah,
they used to walk. Yeah, but then we have to be there quick. Rafts. You know what I mean? We have to...
Maybe we need to be all more like my ancestors. Actually give up flying, do things that we're, instead of sitting here talking about, flying's bad, maybe we should actually not fly.
Well, it's interesting. Let me ask you, Marieke, because, the essence of also being human is having cultural get-togethers like this. There would be some net environmental cost to the Melbourne Literary Festival, but if we cancel it, then as a civilisation, we're losing something, aren't we? Were those thoughts swirling around in your mind putting together a festival like yours?
Was the thought swirling around that my festival would be cancelled? Is that
No. But when you bring together tens of thousands of people over an extended period of time, you do have to try and do it as cleanly as you can.
You do, and I mean, we're a tiny organisation and a not-for-profit, so I guess it's always resources and budget that are sometimes dependent on the decisions that you make there. And obviously our festival this year's moved to the State Library, so it's in a heritage building. I do think that's interesting, that point for conversations, and absolutely, I guess, is my role as a curator and producer is to place these conversations in an accessible way. And if you ask in terms of what I think I can do better, I've been vegan for 11 years, and I think there's a laziness there in making the information that I know accessible to others. It's either that you are an activist and you're on the front line, or you sit with this information and go, well, I know this and I'm doing a great job. I've seen Earthlings and Cowspiracy, so pat on the back for me. And that, I do think activism and some of the choices that people make can be exclusive to other people, and I think finding that bridge to make that information accessible in an empathetic and open way is something I think I can do better.
Zoe?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the lady's question, the lady's response earlier, which is the us and them mentality as well. We all get very righteous. I'm not a vegan. I eat meat. I'm a breeder, clearly, and I fly. Not frequently, but I do. And so on that within that moral stance, I'm, relatively failing, but I feel like we can all get very righteous about what it is we do and stand for, and it creates this divide again, as opposed to encompassing, like embracing, yes, maybe the breeding's not for me, maybe the veganism's not for me. What is for me? What lights me up? This is Paul Hawkins' great quote. He says this frequently when he's asked to speak at such events. What is it that lights you up? What's your area that lights you up? And how can you bring the totality of yourself to that and make a change? And I think what you said about Indigenous culture actually is at the heart of it, because this brings us back to localism, this brings us back to community, this brings us back to connection. And
we know all about the us and them.
And exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think in particularly, like if we look at research and books like Uncle Bruce Pascoe and Dark Emu, and if we, as in us and them, as in all Australians, all humans, actually listen to and allow Indigenous people to have our sovereignty. I have self-sovereignty, I have sovereignty wherever I walk, but until we really have proper sovereignty and it can revolve our old ways of traditional agriculture and aquaculture, and all these things that, instead of degrading the soil and eating all the fish from the ocean and polluting it, instead of like even being vegan, it's like because I'm vegan too, but like 50% of the food is like in plastic, and there's like this and that, and then even when I go and buy, or if I'm bin diving and there's like foods in the bins, bananas, this and that, it's like how many miles have they travelled? All these foods and stuff. It's like we actually need to bring the solution. The solutions need to come from country.
You can't live currently and not be a hypocrite.
Exactly. So even though I have long showers, it's like, well, that's not where the thing is. The thing is, how do we come together? And to do that you look like you really want to say something.
I'm going to throw. You're doing great. Keep rolling on.
It's and things like Extinction Rebellion, like it's not necessarily this political thing. It's a personal thing, and it actually has to. Well, it does have to come both politically and personally, because raise your hand here if you're Indigenous. So there's thanks, you mob. But really, the point of that is, like, I'm one person out of this many people, and I feel like I have a lot of knowledge to share, but it's like I feel sort of debilitated, because when I go out into the arena, I can't go Extinction Rebellion, or what if I get arrested and then thrown in custody and killed, killed in custody, all the deaths in custody. It's like we have so many solutions and are so powerful, but continually people have the stereotypes that Aboriginal people were hunters and gatherers, wandered around, did this and that, would spear a kangaroo every now and then. It's like, actually, we had super incredible systems to manage.
Pascoe's book is amazing.
It's amazing. If you haven't read it, you need to read it, or watch his TED Talks, or, educate yourselves and decolonise yourselves.
Let me ask you, because I know, Peter Singer, when you move between Princeton and the University of Melbourne, you do swim. It's quite amazing. You just bum there in the Atlantic Ocean. You go
Catch a good wave. And
exactly.
End up here,
But these it's challenging. But if we all do what Zoe did and just do as much as we feel we can, is there a risk that is just not enough, and people are going to be forced to do things they're not comfortable with, or significantly cut back on just what we in the first world in particular just feel we have a right to access to? Can we get by just all trying what we sort of convince ourselves is close to a bit?
The short answer to that is no, we clearly can't. But I also don't think we can rely on individuals making those choices. So in a way, the question, how do we have flaws? And certainly I do fly too much, as Damon did and others. We all have those flaws, but I think we need more systematic change. And that's why we do, as Peter Whish-Wilson said, we need to get this into the political arena. We had a tragic failing at the last election here. The United States obviously had an arguably even more tragic failing, the 2016 election. And somehow we have to change that, because without that kind of political change, we are not going to get to where we need to be by appealing to people to make individual, conscientious, environmentally friendly actions.
You had a comment or a question from the audience? You ask something here, ma'am, and then we'll move on with the discussion. What would you like to ask or contribute?
Sorry, I'll be really quick.
No, go for it.
And thank you, Bundjalung Nation, for hosting us here. I really pay respect to their elders past and present. Allara's made some really important points, and I just think that it would be really good for the panel to actually respond to what she's saying. In your respective industries, how are you seeing Indigenous knowledge is actually used to do all these amazing things which we know they can do, what they're capable of? How are they being used in your industries? How are you engaging with Indigenous culture and knowledges and our systems, our ways of doing things? I'd love to hear from a few of you.
Do we have a couple of examples from the panel? Damon, you want to say something? And Mara?
Probably the most exciting one that I've seen is some of our older farmers, sort of 65 to 75-year-olds, that are now consulting with elders about how to regenerate their land and landscapes. What are those traditional farming practices? How can they kickstart such degraded lands again? And that's happening right around the country.
There are incredible stories in 2040, aren't there? If people go back to the old ways of using land and not just beating the bejesus out of it until you've ripped off everything and then moving on, but ripping, rotating, regenerating, and you get those traditional ways bring about better yield, healthier food, less runoff, less...
That's right. it's the only way we're going to survive if we go back to that knowledge.
Peter and Mara, quickly on that wonderful question.
Very quickly, one example in Tassie is we've had 3 out of the last 5 years we've had dry lightning strikes and fires in areas that haven't seen fire for thousands of years with a drying climate. We're now talking to our Indigenous mob down there about mosaic fire stick burning, looking at some of the old techniques. A lot of that knowledge has been lost. And we're now kind of formally embracing that as a way to actually reduce the fuel loads in those areas and kind of manage that land better.
Matt, Mara, quickly, then one more comment from the audience and we'll move the discussion on. Sure. Yes, mate.
Okay, so Parklands here, which we're all residing at the moment, forms part of the Minjibul people of the Bundjalung Nation, and we've been talking a lot with these guys about trying to learn about the importance of this particular area here, because where we're sitting right now has had 70 or 80 years of the most intense flogging from the old white traditional sort of agricultural ways, and so it's been actually quite degraded through cattle, cane, and even and bananas, and so talking with elders, with Uncle Magpie and other people that can give us some understanding not only about the land itself, but also the importance in terms of what it meant to Indigenous folk, because this area is incredibly important, and I'm just starting to learn so much more in terms of how this played such a huge role in bringing many, many clans together over thousands and thousands of years, and I think that's a journey for us to embrace and continue.
Mara.
So thank you for asking the question, and I think it is important to be tangible and practical. So a couple of things that I've experienced around the work that I do. I was a director of the board of a wonderful not-for-profit called Bush Heritage, which is managing very large landscapes in partnership with the Indigenous Land Corporation. Many job creation strategies around how you can align different industries and still protect biodiversity. The great Bruce Pascoe, of course, is affiliated with UTS, and I'm involved with the food research program around digital technologies and the future of food. And there is this great dream that it may be possible working with traditional owners who want to commercialize their knowledge of ancient grains and find jobs in a future which is sustainable around agriculture. How can digital fast track that in sustainable and scalable ways? Third example, at the Australian Conservation Foundation, of course, we've had a long history of working with many different campaigns, including what's happening now around Adani. We have had directors on our board. Currently, Donna Bagnall, who's an Aboriginal woman from Newcastle, is on our board. We are exploring, and we're now in the process of having 100 conversations around the country with, led by, Aboriginal people who are speaking to mobs around the country about how they wish to engage with us and how we can support them in a long-term partnership, not a one-off conversation. And the very final example, which is my favorite, the late, great Philip Toyne, who was, of course, the CEO of ACF for many years, had many startups, and his last one is called Natural Carbon. And it's an offset program that works in partnership with Indigenous people on the top end so that they can find jobs around things like savanna burning and be part of the future of carbon farming, actually plant and hold on to in the great grazing estates how we can bring carbon back into the soil and create jobs on their land.
Final audience contribution or question at this stage before I move the discussion on. What would you like to say?
Hello, can you hear me?
Well, we can, yeah.
So I also want to acknowledge that we're on Bundjalung land right now. I appreciate that we're able to be here right now. And I also, I guess, acknowledge that there is only one Aboriginal person on the panel, and I really appreciate, Allara, that you're having to bring the conversation back to First Nations people, because everything we're talking about environment, relates to the First Nations people and the land that it's happening on. And, it is a shame that we aren't able to hear more diverse viewpoints, and I feel like it's a constant fight to bring it back to this conversation. But we've talked a lot about personal change, and I want to acknowledge that most of the contribution to climate change is happening from large corporate companies and mining companies, and we just haven't talked about that. And I also...
Oh, we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting
there. Oh,
no,
you worry.
And when we talk about that, I really would love to hear about the work that's done with traditional owners on the land to the mining's extracted from, but also, I guess, like the work that you're doing to help with that, but also with the climate change that's impacting First Nations people here, because we did talk a bit about our neighbouring countries, and I found it disappointing that we didn't mention like what's happening here in the Torres Strait and what's happening all around the country. We're already seeing climate change happen. So I think, that's really disappointing.
Fantastic. What's your name, can I ask?
Nicole.
Nicole, great, because you're not going to believe this, but at the party, this woman called Nicole walks straight in and says to these people, listen, you are just a bunch of bourgeois blowhards faffing on about eating meat and having kids, as if individual decisions matter at all. The environmental crisis, Nicole says, it's not necessarily you, might be, has been created by industrial capitalism. We need to channel all of our energy into transforming the economic and political system itself. Individual choices are just endlessly fascinating distractions from the main game. End quote. Well said, Nicole. What would our panel say if they were part of that discussion? Nicole came in from the side with a broadside against the very basis of the economic and political system under which we live in this country. Who wants to start off that one? Damon.
I agree, but if we did it tomorrow, it would be absolutely chaotic. History says that if you remove a system, it creates a vacuum, and that's where bad stuff can happen. So we need to be smart about how we transition to this new system. No one knows what it looks like yet. We have to co-design it together. There are great models out there of how we factor in more things we value to the system instead of just GDP and money, which we measure everything by. Places like Bhutan bring in environmental wellness, vitality, psychological well-being, all these other factors that are valued start getting measured in the system. They're not as focused on money. That's a first simple step. I think we can't just stop the system right now. There's such inertia. I want to do it, but if we did it, it would be absolutely chaotic.
But at the same time, you could almost say word for word for that. If you were an executive of a coal company going, look, I'd love to go to full solar tomorrow, but we've got to be very careful. We've got to take this very slowly, very slowly. Just protecting the patch of the current rent seekers and dominant interest. Doesn't there have to be a degree of revolution if we want to overturn something as embedded as capitalism and modern day democracy?
100%. But we also have to, I think, look after each other as human beings, and people will lose their jobs and they'll be decimated and angry and they'll fight. So we have to make sure we're nurturing them and understanding that this transition has to happen. If we just march into a town and say, your job's shit, it's ruining the planet, end it. This is what happened in Queensland. They push back because they're not being treated as human beings. Let's not throw out that element while we transition.
Heidi and Peter, I think, want to say something. Fire away.
Yeah, but during World War II, there were car manufacturing companies that were overnight transformed into military weaponising companies. So,
Sorry.
So, and
they were given jobs.
That was a bad thing.
Jobs.
They were.
Clarify, that was a bad thing.
But
they were nurtured and given jobs to make the transition.
And the order came from the top down. It was government, money and initiative that determined that. So yeah, I mean, there's absolute, like the top dogs in government, they could do so much more. We all are aware of this. But structural change is where it has to happen.
Peter, you know the top dogs in government better than most of us. What are your thoughts on this issue, personal or your observations from being in this industry?
Yeah, it's a political failure at the end of the day. And it's actually quite easily fixed. I'm all for Extinction Rebellion and civil disobedience. It's where the Green Movement started. But in politics, there's a few simple things we can do. One, for example, is fixing political donations. All it takes is a piece of legislation and putting that to Parliament. And I can tell you, the previous Environment Minister, Melissa Pleiss, she approved a uranium mine on the last day before Parliament was officially dissolved, and so for her responsibilities, she approved Adani, the groundwater plan, hours before the Scott Morrison went to see the Governor-General. You can draw your own conclusions why she and the Liberal Party were so close to the mining industry. It's pretty simple. There's pay for play. The big donors to both Labor and Liberal, $5 or $6 million have gone to them from the mining industry as one example. They see it right across the board. If we limited those donations...
But you're talking about the big donors to about 138 of the 150 elected representatives in the House, so how are you possibly going to change that? Which of those people is going to put their hand up and go, I'll turn off the spigot of money that's coming to me from big business or the union movement?
It has to come from people in the audience. It has to come from individuals saying, how many of you went into the polling booth at this election, or how many of your friends went in saying, I will pledge my vote to a party that bans political donations, knowing it is the root cause, knowing it is the root cause of the problem we have in our democracy, which leads to all the shit that we're having to deal with in climate change and a range of other issues. It is actually, from my perspective, that easy. We need to get people to cut through and say that they will pledge their vote, because the only currency politicians listen to is voting and self-interest. So it actually isn't that hard, but we need to get people very focused at them with political strategies. Coming back to what I said earlier, it has to come down to having a political strategy.
One place where there's a discussion going on, you spend a lot of your time in the United States and in environmental politics in general, from what we hear at a distance about the Green New Deal in the US, people like AOC and her group in the Parliament are pushing for what seems to be a comparatively radical environmental / political / economic policy that's getting more traction than just total fringe discussion. I don't expect you to be an expert on it, but is there something in the Green New Deal? Has that got genuine purchase? Could anything happen there, or will that just be an interesting little firestorm before big business rolls around to the next election in the US?
I don't know that it's just big business, but it is, it has some good things in it, right? It builds on the original New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt's way of getting out of the Depression by a lot of government spending, creating a lot of jobs. But it says do it in a green way, do it with 100% renewable energy, promote all of that, a lot of new jobs in that.
Transitioning workers out of traditional fossil fuel industries into new alternatives.
Exactly, all of those sorts of things with quite a lot of public spending. So it has a lot of positives in it. But the present American climate is, if you're talking about the progressive side of it at least, is very much focused on getting rid of Trump. And there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who think that we can't be too radical because Trump is going to, or the whole Republicans are going to paint us as raving socialists, which is a really negative word in the United States, and we're not going to get rid of Trump. So there's the mainstream Democrats, Joe Biden being the leading one of them, I guess, who are saying, no, we don't want to put this out. And in fact, when the resolution came to the Senate, the Democrats didn't vote for it. So it got defeated. The Democrats didn't vote against it. They abstained. They voted present. And I think the vote was 57-0 against. So on that basis, it doesn't look like it's going to get up before the next election anyway.
One thing that leads in, when you hear about Biden v Trump, you do think it is quite amazing if in this age of the importance of diversity and trying to break the system a bit, if the Democrats go, look, we've actually found someone older than Trump who we think is the brave new progressive way forward. Has anyone not thought...
It's depressing, and there are some very good alternative candidates. Kamala Harris made a big impression in the debates. She's part African American, part Indian descent. Did very well. Also, Elizabeth Warren has a lot of great policies. She's perhaps too much of a policy wonk for some of the American electorate, but she certainly thought more about many of these issues, including the influence of big money in politics, and she said she's not taking big money. So there are a lot of other good candidates out there who would be much more diverse, obviously. Will the Democrat voters take the chance on them being able to defeat Trump? I mean, that's really hard to predict at this stage.
Mara, you've worked everywhere from Macquarie Bank through to Australian Ethical Investment, so you've seen modern capitalism in a lot of its different shades and shadows. What's your take on the need to or the potential to radically change the system?
So I am at risk of talking too long. I can just feel so much important content, and so first of all, don't believe the news. Get educated around the world. And I've just come back from the US, and a place like California is part of the US, but actually is the 7th biggest economy in the world, tracking to an incredible renewable energy and many, many good stories coming out of parts of the US. There's posters outside that say, "Bring Assange home." So 2 years ago, I sat in a basement in the Gold Coast, and we Skyped Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy. It was insanely interesting about the future of democracy. A philosopher from Monash University asked him the question, "What do you think about politics? We have an election coming up. What do you think between the Greens and Labour?" And he looked at the camera and he started laughing. And he said, "Seriously? You people really," and I say this with great respect, because there is, of course, a role for politics. You people really think it matters? Don't you understand that politicians are those funny people that jump in front of the train every once in a while to pretend that they're leading it, and then the train mows them down? What is driving the world? Two things from my lens, and it is a precious thing we must turn around. Capital and data. And if you're not interested in how investment will change this dial, then it's a great conversation, but we must all take interest for it to really change. Two quick stories, one about what we did and one about what we're gonna do. So I first came to Australia in 1990. I was a young volunteer. I had spent 5 years with a big investment bank called Morgan Stanley in New York. I had a backpack and I met Bob Brown. And I was volunteering at Twiz and I volunteered with their finances and blah, blah, blah. And this guy approached and said, my dad has a finance company and we're thinking about ethical investment. No one's really heard of it. Can you help us do a little marketing thing? And we put together a marketing pitch to Twiz members. One of the funds had $15 million funded by hippies that wanted to invest in plantations. That was called August Investments. It became a managed fund. It became a superannuation fund. I joined the board of Australian Ethical Investments in 2013. We had $400 million under management. Yesterday we announced we have $3.4 billion. It is 100% divested, not just from fossil fuels. The entire portfolio is tracking towards net zero. Here's the interesting thing. When I joined the board, the share price was at 23 cents. It's tracking around $2, right? Who didn't need money to get to Splendour? Like, we have to care about the world that we are in, and we have to change it. And here's how we're going to do it all over again. And unfortunately, we don't have banners here, but just over the corner here, we fought the wars of coal seam gas right here. We stopped it at the border, right? There were almighty protests. Stop the Gate was everywhere. There was one protest where thousands of people stayed at Bentley until the police came 3 times, and finally the Premier said, okay, we get it. You guys don't want coal seam gas. That same group said it's not enough. We're going to start our own energy company. And we crowdfunded $4 million right here in this community. And we now have a company that we own that's 70% renewable. And guess what? It's got a national license. It's opening in Sydney, in the heart of Sydney, in October. It's coming to the Gold Coast in January. Just like your platform, this whole new economy is coming out of the ground, and we have to care about investment.
Would you be good enough to tell us the name of that company?
So you're going to love it, especially when you Google it, because it is just so beautiful. It's called Enova Community Energy, E-N-O-V-A. And on the board, we have people that really care, like the head of Stone and Wood, massive, awesome beer company here in Byron. You know, like, there are these enterprises coming out of the ground, and we can turn this dial together.
Allara wants to say something, and Zoe, I'll get those, and then Heidi, fire away.
No offense, but money is really stupid, and what you've done is great, good for you, but it's all from the profits of Aboriginal land. And what are you giving back? And would have you even had that opportunity if it wasn't for stolen wealth?
You know,
Mara, back to you.
What can I say other than true? What you say is entirely true.
Great.
Now,
so can we all just give away our money and just go back to gardening and caring for each other? Like, why are we so obsessed with money? Like, the number of times I've heard jobs, we still sound like capitalists. Jobs, economics, growth, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, earth, let's worship the mother.
But at the same time, Allara, absolutely, but you live in a 21st century today where kids are not dying of polio. You live in a world today where women are not dying in childbirth at anywhere near the rate en masse that they used to.
But don't forget, Indigenous people are the fastest dying people in the world.
Absolutely. I think they're two not totally connected issues. There are certain things about today's society that people would argue, certainly in the West, but no, people would argue that over the last 20 years, more people around the world have been lifted out of poverty than in any comparable period of time, and that's been largely done through wealth generated in modern capitalist systems, which are nowhere near perfect.
That's this very white saviour version of what... Well, that's what I'm hearing, no offence.
But I know, completely. But you're also asking people who are making this money to either stop doing it or do something with it. So do you genuinely see a system where capitalism is foregone by the world as a whole and it still continues to, and I'm not saying you're not, just put some more bones on that for us.
What I see is that Indigenous people need equity. Let's be honest. We're here in Australia, 3% of the population, and the way I see it is we're all here now and we all have to get along. And it's going to take a lot of respect, I think, from both us and them to be able to create using new technology and our old ancient technologies to be able to move forward with respect and justice. And that justice won't come until Australia admits its genocide, until Indigenous people have 100% proper land rights, and all organisations that are wealthy off Indigenous land are paying some sort of Indigenous tax.
Zoe and Heidi, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, so much has happened since I had that original thought, but Peter, I mean, yeah, Professor Singer, he obviously has written the book, you know, the most good you can do, and he does speak about in one of his works about, you know, the wealthy countries donating to developing nations being a greater impact than wealthy countries donating within their countries. But I think what Mara was speaking to and what rose in me at that point was this feeling of, we're talking about systemic change, but we're imposing new paradigms in old systems. We're trying to adapt, you know, we're trying to do the same old system, which is a fundamentally broken system, and adapt it to these, you know, more ecological, more sustainable, more ethical versions. But fundamentally, this profit, there's still a small group of people benefiting and creating a lot of profit from that. Like she said, the shares have gone up to $2, and someone bought shares back then and they're making a lot of money off that. And that system needs to change. So it's actually the systems within that hold the platform are what we really need to look at changing. And I think this also comes back, bizarrely, to matrescence, the experience, the journey to becoming a mother, oddly, and Indigenous wisdom hold keys here, deep keys, and I think that's what Allara is, because it's so embodied in her, that's what is springing forth, and I see springing forth, and that just like her Indigenous wisdom is embodied in her, the matrescence is embodied in me, and it's a different system. Women, once they birth, something changes in your brain. You see things in a more of a collective, and you do, this is studied and this is researched, your brain actually creates new synapses that fire and wire your brain differently to hold bigger space for people, to be more inclusive, to have greater empathy. These changes happen automatically when you become a mother. So look, I don't know how it all comes together, but I think there's embodied, lived, experienced wisdom that we can't avoid, that once we have felt it, comes through, and that's where the reverence of the land comes through so strongly for Indigenous countries. But let's not just talk about Indigenous Australia, let's talk about Indigenous culture around the world, because, you know, we had a show of hands of who's Indigenous before. That people are Indigenous to somewhere, we're all Indigenous to somewhere, and we have deep roots that were once very connected to land, and we're far more disconnected from that nowadays, absolutely. Part of that's systemic, it's partly the way we live, but I think returning our awareness to that level of something deeper and greater than ourselves, and having a reverence. I know Mara has her Buddhist sort of leanings, and there's a shift that needs to happen in society generally to broaden our perspective beyond this reality that we're perceiving currently into something more expansive.
I'm going to let Peter respond in a second, after which Sose is going to get the microphone around the room for a couple of quick questions before we move on to our final topic area. Peter, what did you want to say on anything that's been raised in the last little while?
Look, I just wanted to say that, you know, There are certain things you can say here in Byron, in Splendour, in this festival. You'll get a round of applause in this room. Unfortunately, this is not representative of our country. If we want to be realistic about change, we want to be realistic about trying to slow climate change. We can't stop it anymore, but we can slow it. We need to work with things that are feasible. And I think talking about a revolution and overthrowing capitalism, unfortunately, is not going to happen in time to make those changes. I don't think talking about abandoning money and opening up and being expansive and so on is going to reach enough people in time to make the changes that we need to see. We may not like the system that we have, but neither political nor economic, but I think we have to really be realistic and use that system as best we can to get the changes that we need within the next 10 or 20 years. Otherwise, we're heading for catastrophic changes to the planet that no amount of wisdom, indigenous or modern technological wisdom, is going to save us from.
We've got 17 minutes, 40 seconds left for this panel, so I'll get a couple of audience questions/comments. Apologies that realistically we probably won't get to all of you because this is really sparking a lot of discussion, which is great. But if you find the microphone in front of you, give us a quick comment or question. We might get a response from the panel and keep moving. What have you got there for us?
Hello. So I've got a few points. I'm sorry.
Realistically, make them pretty tight or other people will miss out.
Quickly.
Yep.
So first one was there was no discussion on adoption or fostering. I think that's killing two birds with one stone. You obviously get your kids.
We shouldn't be killing birds at all.
Okay.
No, okay, good point.
Keep going.
So, obviously you're educating more people quite quickly in your personal life, and also you've got your kids. So there's quite, fostering and adoption is a very big thing. A lot of people don't really take in consideration.
Yep.
Maybe we should start to. The second one was from the point before is, do what you can. So if you are vegan but you can't get your beans in less packaging, just buy in bulk. Or, just do what you can in the area that you live in. I know it's quite difficult in cities. You can't have your gardens there. You can't have access to your organics, or you might just have Coles or Woolworths, and they've got the bulk bins there, which are okay. But obviously, if you can buy in bulk. And the last point would be from the step to where we are now to getting back to the Aboriginal ways, which I absolutely love. Living off the land, learning from them, and everything is absolutely amazing. I think getting back to that would be starting with community. So we're all quite disconnected in our ways. I'd love to get back to a point where you've got connections between people and you can start, bargaining or, living a little bit less without money.
Fantastic. It's going to be my very next topic area. Love that we can at least the great thing about this is you can throw it. So throw it to the gentleman. There we go. Okay, what would you like to ask, mate, or say?
Just a comment on language, I think. Mara, I understand the context of who you are and what you do and the organisation that you work for, but I think talking about stuff that you started when you came to Australia and the organisations that you've been a part of, the important thing to express to crowds and the public is what you've done with those things and what you're doing good for the environment, not how much money is it worth now and what the share price was and what it is now. And I think, I agree, I would love to see socialism, and I agree with Peter Singer that it's not going to happen that quickly. It doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for it, but when we're talking about business, let's talk about what we're doing positive for the environment, not how much money our share prices have
Great.
risen.
Can I prompt you with a question? I get the impression the point you're making is that that ethical investments, and so investing in environmentally sustainable and replenishing technologies, is returning more than the general market on investing in coal, etc. at the moment. So that should indicate to everyone this is the double win that you're looking for. You're making advances on the environmental front and generating wealth that can then be put into reducing poverty or wherever you choose to put it.
And forgive me, I'm so sorry for not connecting. My purpose is not to make money, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
You'd still be at Morgan Stanley in the US doing what you were doing.
Believe me, that world is a crazy world, and it's an unhappy world, and it's full of lies about what the world actually is. I'm just a bit like Peter here now on the ground trying to work out what to do because, I spent 4 years at CSIRO and met a lot of the climate scientists, and those are people who can't sleep at night because the models that they have are much worse than the models that the world is talking about. And it's a 45-degree future. It's insanity what's happening. And in places like India, hundreds of millions of people are not going to have a monsoon. That already started happening this year. And it is 10, 15 years. So I do apologize, because I don't want to stand here saying I'm here telling you how to make money. I'm here telling you we are in the world that we're in. I'm in the world I'm in, and here's what I'm trying to do within it.
What would you like to comment, mate? This will be the last audience one before we move to the song. Fire away.
Yo, you got this. Cool.
Loud and clear.
So my name's Paul. I'm a Gunnar Kona and Yorta man, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Bundjalung people of this nation that we're in now in this beautiful lands. And I'd like to say I'm pretty disappointed with this panel. I'm very, very happy to hear from Allara. Thank you very much, my sister. And we had a beautiful opening before from this woman over here, some own woman, and I'm disappointed that we didn't get to have her on the panel and any more black and brown people that should have been part of this conversation, to be honest. So that's what I'm going to leave it at.
Thank you very much for your contribution, mate. I'm going to move the conversation along to the next part of the panel because the dinner party's going along well. It's a little bit sticky. You know, it's a bit of fun. It's great. There's a great conversation going on. And someone just pauses and kicks back and sucks in and just thinks for a second, you know, what's it all about? At the end of the day, being human. What's it all about? What does it mean to be human? We've been asking today about the environment, seeing it through the environmental lens, but at a deeper level, what does it mean? What are the drivers, the fundamentals of being human, as an individual or as a group of humans just trying to, in inverted commas, get along? Just if any of you have got any pearls of wisdom, what's it all about? Gareth, you've got a microphone there, my friend. You're a singer-songwriter, guitar-playing hero. If there's any group I go to for advice on, it's guitar players. Fire away, rock god. What's the whole game about, man?
It's animal behaviour. We're mammals. We just like to look after ourselves. And I don't know, we're just going to ignore shit until you can't ignore it, and then it'll get done. It's like with the Vietnam War protests, there was conscription, so you couldn't just ignore it away. You know, the people who are going to do something about climate change first are the people who are going to be affected by it really badly first. I mean, we're all getting affected by it, but, you know, until it really is hitting you hard, you know, the sea level's rising on your little island. You know, I don't...
Deep down, are you inherently optimistic that we will pull through this? We might have to really slam on the brakes. We will pull through this?
We always do. We're good at, you know, rolling with the punches as a species. So... You know, but then we will wait till the last minute. Like you were talking about World War II and they just quickly changed car factories over. But, you know, that was because we were in peril. You know what I mean? We need to be in peril before we do anything. We never do anything before that.
What do you think on that, Matt? Because some people do say, look, ozone layer, we sorted it out. You know, the World War II, horrible. We sorted it out. Spanish flu, got past that one. It's going to be grim, but we're Aussies. We're humans. Yeah. We always get there.
Well, two things about humans. They're incredibly smart. And they're incredibly dumb. And I think I agree exactly with you. My take on it is that the human race is going to survive. It's just going to be an incredibly large cost to a vast majority of people on this planet. So am I optimistic about the race? Yes, but not for everyone. And I think this is the quandary that we've all been talking about here today. How, as a collective, how as intelligent people can we move it forward? And it's a fucking big question.
And the point you're making, Sose, can you make it again? Because some people are coming in halfway through this. It is, and Allara agrees, I think, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I've read you were saying this, it's the indigenous people of large swathes of the world who are feeling or will feel most directly and intensely the first wave of this stuff.
Quite literally the first wave. I saw a Batuta article recently that talked about the Face app making things older, and I don't know if anyone saw it, it's quite funny, that they put it on a small Pacific nation and it just disappeared. That's a reality, you know. The fact that my family still lives in a village where running water is still something that could or could not be a thing in a few years, that scares me. Considering we live so close and we barely see it being reported on in mainstream media. When it does happen, it's like, oh, okay, that's really sad. But then we move on. We forget about it. So I do think that there is a lot of validity in the sense that we do by nature kind of just ignore until it directly affects us and is on our doorstep.
Tell me more about the discussion points about it, because you do hear some concern for tiny Pacific Islands. Do you think it's genuinely in the lens of discussion, or a few people understand? Or
I think it is, but I mean, I can only say from living here and being kind of involved in the media side of things, it's all in the way it's presented. So places like Samoa, they're still being they're being marketed as such an idyllic tourist destination. There's no industry there anymore because even the people who are from there, they can't, living there is something that is under threat. So I feel like it is in the lens of discussion, but it's still very much put over here than here.
Peter Singer, can I ask you, is it inherent in humans, well, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, is it inherent in humans en masse to consider themselves first and be looking this way, or is it inherently human to think about people whose lot is completely different to you, but they are human and we're all in this together, and if that means I have to give something up, I'll do it? Or is that inherently, by definition, a challenge for people who do have more?
So the answer is we're both. Obviously, our ancestors had to think about their own interests first to survive, and then the interests of their children. Otherwise, they would not have passed on their genes, and we're the result of those millennia of selection of people who managed to survive and managed to protect their vulnerable young children to survive. So we do have that built-in bias for ourselves and our children. But we also have the capacity to reason, and I think, if you ask what is distinctive about humans, there may be other beings capable of reasoning at the same level that we've been talking about today elsewhere in the universe, but if so, we haven't met them yet. So
we'll be discussing that at 3:30 in the Science Tent today if you want to come along. Keep going.
Oh, right, great. So we have that capacity to reason, which means we can put ourselves in the place of other people. We can put ourselves in the place of Samoans and what's happening to them, and other low-lying Pacific islands and what will happen to them as they disappear under the waves, or in the place of our own Indigenous people and the injustice and hardship that they've suffered, or in the place of people living on the Bangladesh Delta regions where, if you're talking about numbers, we're talking about 20, 30 million people, more than the entire population of Australia, who are living on land that's no more than a metre or two above sea level and is predicted to go under sea level, quite possibly around the end of the century. So that's what we have to do. We have to use that capacity to reason to put ourselves in the situation of others. But it will always be a challenge because we will always be going against this idea of, yes, but I care first about me and my immediate family, and we have to persuade people to think beyond that.
Marieke, can I ask you, something like the Melbourne Literary Festival, that is an ideas festival. It's people coming together to talk, engage, sometimes disagree, have conversations. When people come together and talk, what are the essential human values that come through? What are things that define rather than divide us?
Well, I mean, I work hard this is my second festival this year, and to try and create that empathetic connection between the people who are speaking on the stage and the people who have come to listen. I do think what we've been speaking about today, there is, a ribbon of hopelessness through it all, and it's very hard to retain hope in the face of that. So, I mean, the small thing that I can do is create platforms for those conversations and re-anchoring us always to the fact that people are in our community, are thinking about it, are taking action, are perhaps feeling the same way as us, and creating that connection between people, I think, is my most important role as a curator.
Peter wants to say something. I'll get a comment from anyone else who wants on this point, and then I'm going to ask one final uplifting question to wrap it up. Peter Whish-Wilson, what do you want to say?
Look, I think Peter's comment about Darwinism through to selfish gene, through to animal spirits in capitalism, it's logical that people will react when their own self-interest is at stake. So we're noticing the climate strike movement that started out of Europe started because people are noticing changes in their environment. They're seeing record temperatures, they're seeing changes, and they're getting concerned and they're wanting action. It concerns me that, we haven't really had time to discuss it today, but the way I see what's fundamentally human is that we're only part of nature, we're not the master of nature. And this is where we can learn so much from our First Nations peoples, and that is we're connected to nature, and if we lose that connection, and we're fast doing that, then we're losing a big part of ourselves. It's not just self-interest. We have a spiritual connection to nature all around us, whether you're a surfer, whether you're a bushwalker, doesn't matter what it is. When we lose that, we've lost a fundamental part of who we are, and we will survive. I have no doubt we'll survive as a species, but we will lose our identity, and things that I really highly value, and that makes me very sad.
Any other quick comments on this topic, and then we're going to wrap it up. Mara?
Quick comment. It's like we as a species, like many others, have this inherent kind of care and empathy, and there's something quite feminine about it. Coming back to your point, there's something about what happens when, you know, a bird, the mother is just doing everything to just feed that, you know, and there's no cognition of high level that we know of, and we see it with parents, we see it with mothers and babies, and so we have this inherent ability to see the world through the suffering and needs of each other, and then our brains are designed to collaborate. That is how our brains have evolved. That's how we made cities. That's how we connected to each other. And there's a deep history of that in traditional knowledge that we can build on, that collaboration model. So somehow inherently in our minds and, you know, with our feet on the ground, we can do this thing.
Allara, can I get a last comment from you on this topic, if there's anything you want to say? Then I'm going to finish on a slightly different note. Is there anything you want to say on the essence of being human?
It's a pretty beautiful thing to be human. For me, there's a couple of things. It's love, it's family, it's laughing, it's helping each other out, it's eating, it's enjoying the good things, the simple things, the small things, and for me, it's in the country, like, and the connection with nature, 100%. Like that's really the essential thing that makes every single human on the planet the same in the way that there'll be a human, and that we cannot live without nature. So as humans, the purpose of us to keep us alive and survive and to continue on as we've been going, to continue being human, that is directly connected to country, right? And that's where we also most often find the most joy. So I think that has to be at the forefront of every decision we make, and the mindfulness between what our everyday actions do to contribute to that.
Great. It's been an amazing discussion that has at times been, you know, challenging and confronting. I'm going to finish on an up note. I'm going to get from anyone on the panel who wants to throw in something positive that we can do right now in the face of these sort of issues. I'll start by quoting you, Peter Whish-Wilson, in a recent Twitter feed. While I'm at it, if you care about our oceans, understand the perils we face and the imperatives for action, and you're crazy enough to want to work in a political office, I'm recruiting. So, Peter's looking for employees. If you want to come and see him about getting a job, he's the man to speak to if you want to work at the coalface of trying to bring about this sort of change. Damon, Zoe, tell us a bit about the fan-forcing model of getting your film out there. Fascinating.
Well, it's just a model that says now that the film's about to finish its cinema run, that people can put on their own screening in their community or on their office or in their workplace or school, and you actually get paid to put on that screening. So you get a percentage. It's like more of a decentralised model rather than just going through the top-down cinema structure. You're able to actually get paid to sharing that film and kickstarting discussions and debates like this.
And is that I'm hearing you actually getting people on board wanting to get the message out there. Is it starting to kick on?
Yeah, well, the film's already one of the highest grossing documentaries ever in Australia, and I think it speaks to how people are ready for a new conversation. And I think, just to end on a positive note, I have spent the last 3.5 years going around the world seeing the best of human beings and their ingenuity and their love and their creative and care for this planet. And
Because part of the message of 2040 is if we are brave enough using the technologies that exist right now, we can make tremendous inroads in a lot of these areas.
Yeah, everything we have is available. And it's not just technology in the traditional sense, it is in the biological sense. Returning carbon to the soil, seaweed permaculture that regenerates the oceans and brings back life to the oceans. These exist. There are beautiful humans doing these. We just don't hear about them in the mainstream press. But I would just tell everyone to go beyond that. Look in the shadows. It's the hope in the dark. It's not on the main stage. It's in the wings here where people are doing phenomenal things, and we can do this, and I think we will do it. And I didn't think that 3 years ago.
Heidi, if people want to get involved in feet, what can they do?
Well, in about a month's time, we'll be opening to the public. So it means that everyone who is worried about the fact that that they contribute to the overall emissions of a festival like this, you can get involved by putting some money into the solar farms that we're building around Australia. The first one has been built 4 hours away. So in about a year's time, when it's finished, we could all go visit it and maybe even have a sing-along there.
Fantastic. Peter Whish-Wilson?
Very, very simple and very quickly. If you care about country, if you care about your community and you care about your future, do two simple things. Always remain optimistic no matter what. Always remain optimistic and take action. That's it.
Gareth, if we all want to get together and celebrate our community, our common humanity by watching Tropical Fuckstorm this afternoon, where do we do that, at what time and on what stage, my friend, are you rocking out?
Graham McLennan, 5:30.
There you go. Give our panel a big round of applause. What a fascinating discussion it's been, ladies and gentlemen. I can't speak for all of our... I think some of our panellists at least can stay down the front for a couple of seconds if people want to come and ask some particular questions about stuff they were talking about. But you have been wonderful as well. Thank you very much to all our organisers. A real interesting discussion. Continue to attend events at the Forum and the Science Tent throughout the day and enjoy the rest of your Splendour.
Go decolonise now!